Hey dude, I found Journey to the West. It's the book that Enslaved's based on. I need you to read it and finish it before the episode ends.
This means I'm gonna have to rewrite the entire script.
Enslaved was one of those games that no one ever really talked about. It slipped in unnoticed and failed to really make a splash despite receiving positive reviews.
However, I don't think it was due to being bad, just overshadowed and at least a little bit misunderstood. It came out about a week before Fallout New Vegas and about a month before Assassin's Creed Brotherhood and Black Ops 1. It's easy to see why this game was overshadowed. I mean, I'm guilty of this too because my favorite game of all time, Def Jam Rap Star, came out the very same day. Enslaved Odyssey of the West is based on a 1592 novel, Journey to the West by Wu Chang-in, except it takes all the Chinese mythology elements and replaces them with science fiction elements. After escaping capture, Monkey, the roguish fellow with the Goku hair, is enslaved by Trip, a hacker who needs escorted back to her home village.
Wait a second. A roguish scoundrel? A tough-as-nails damsel in distress? A looming evil? An adaptation of a cornerstone to Eastern culture? This sounds familiar.
She uses a headband that links up to their bio signs and can control Monkey. If Monkey gets too far away or lets Trip die, the headband will kill him.
Sounds like the start of a game that's completely dedicated to escort missions, right? Wrong.
I'm actually impressed at how little Trip feels like a burden, because in most games that involve keeping someone safe, they're more likely to 1. Never help you in any combat situation, and 2. More than likely to wind up dying after wandering into gunfire like a lost child. Though I wouldn't say she's extremely helpful in most situations like say Elizabeth in Bioshock Infinite, but she is tough and does have some tricks to distract enemies for a short time. I think Trip is one of the most interesting parts of this game. There is a looming evil mechanical force that controls the world, but the primary antagonist is Trip, and yet, at the same time, she's your closest ally. Monkey's journey is dependent on Trip's survival, and as the game unfolds, their interactions drive the story. However, that's where Enslaved has a problem. Monkey and Trip have some great chemistry together, but when other characters are introduced, they don't feel like they carry as much weight. Even Pigsy, who's in the game for the entire second half, never really feels as useful or as developed as they do. That's a minor complaint though for a surprisingly well done story.
I do have mixed opinions on Enslaved's gameplay though. It's reminiscent of the action platformers of the early 2000s like Jak and Daxter and Sly Cooper. And though those games are great, when done 10 years later, Enslaved doesn't bring a lot of originality to gameplay.
The game combines platforming and brawling-based combat. However, with about 3 attacks and no real combos, the combat can be a little bit repetitive. It's broken up a little later in the game with the use of enemies that are only weakened by certain moves and some ranged attacks. But the game decides not to use these until after the first few levels, which consists of you doing the same 2 moves over and over again. I will say the platforming is surprisingly fluid. It's easy to keep Monkey in motion, which keeps the game's pacing up. But there's really no challenge to it. The handholds are shiny enough to be seen from almost any angle, and they're always in a convenient spot. But some of the level design is creative enough to make it feel fluid and fun. Like with a lot of type of these platformers though, the camera will likely fight you just as much as your enemies, and sometimes I found that pointing the control stick in the direction I wanted to go didn't actually make me move when platforming, and instead I had to move it either straight up or straight left.
Those minor flaws in gameplay aside, Enslaved has an understanding of its intended style.
The first parts of the game involve Monkey and Trip running through the post-apocalyptic remains of New York. Unlike most games in this genre, Enslaved uses very little brown and gray and relies heavily on blues and greens instead. It's a nice change of pace for this type of game and makes the tone feel more hopeful. The facial expressions in game are very convincing as well, and after some research I discovered they improved through motion capture technology. Most notably, Monkey's facial expressions and voice work were done by Andy Serkis, and Trip's was done by Lindsay Shaw.
You know, Mose from Ned's Declassified.
I think that's what made the story the most convincing. These 2 lead characters are professional actors who not only lent their voice but their faces to make their emotions feel just that more real. That coupled with a script that combines legitimate tension and actual comedy, not that video game style humor like actually funny moments, makes this game have one of the better narratives I've played.
That's what Enslaved does best. It mixes incredible narratives with nostalgic style gameplay, and with those 2 together I'd have to say I highly recommend Enslaved.
I just finished the script. Okay, so I think on page 27 here, we got...
I just finished the episode.
Just finished the book. What are you...
I read the plot synopsis online. Wait a second. A roguish scoundrel? A tough as nails damsel in distress? A looming evil? An adaptation of a cornerstone to Eastern culture? This sounds familiar.
It's Spaceballs.
It's totally Spaceballs.